What?
Oh,
Well, good morning to all, and welcome to the panel discussion on blue carbon, a dual approach to climate resilience for small island nations. We want to thank the Barbados delegation for allowing us to host this panel discussion from Base Carbon. We at Base Carbon, we are a financier of emission reduction projects, primarily in the global south, enabling high-quality carbon credit generations for global voluntary carbon market. I also want to take this time to introduce our panel that are with us this morning. We have Svenja Tele. She is the Director of Origination at Base Carbon, advancing project opportunities from concept to execution in a cross-vertical approach. Svenja further holds a doctoral research fellow at the Gunn Institute of Environment and served as the climate policy advisor of the United Nations headquarters, where she gained deep insight into carbon markets and regulatory processes. On my immediate right is Sandeep Roy Chaudhry. He is the director and co-founder of VNV Advisory Services, which is a leading social enterprise in Asia and East Africa. Sandeep has over 19 years experience in the industry, and with a degree in electronics and as a Salisbury Global Fellow, Sandeep is actively involved in the climate policy awareness. Finally, we have Torsten Tille, an expert in sustainable blue finance, joined on over 20 years experience in project and infrastructure finance with leading financial institutions. He's the founder of Global Ocean Trust and affiliate scholar at the IASS. So I want to welcome each of our panelists this morning. We want to do something a bit different even in the introduction of our panelists, because a lot of what we do is quite abstract to a lot of persons that we talk to. So I wanted to give an opportunity for each of the panelists to also introduce themselves. And we've asked them to submit a photograph that gives insight into your experiences and your passion in the carbon space. So Svenja, let's start with you. We have your photograph. Let's hear about the photograph that you've submitted.
Yeah, I think working in climate change, it's often such an abstract story, and it doesn't really works. Okay, it doesn't really tell what sort of work we are doing on the ground and where a lot of the solutions come from. And most of the origination work happens in communities. And my story, why I started working in climate change more than a decade ago, was really thinking about the next generation. And we see here, it was from a field visit just last week or 2 weeks ago in India, in a project that is in a very drought-prone region with smallhold farmers. And today is Ocean Day. We are talking about water. Sometimes there's a lot of water at shorelines, and in this case, it's not enough water. So at the heart of the project is actually building out well and irrigation infrastructure. So in that moment, we were just sitting down for community consultations, and it was a very spontaneous situation where this little girl handed me amaranth, which you can also eat, which is a product out of the agroforestry production, and it really touched me. So it was one of those moments where you just realize why you're doing the work you're doing.
Excellent. Sandeep?
uh, I think from a perspective of when you asked why we do what we do, I mean, I think it's sometimes you. For me, I think it was identifying a gap in getting benefits of carbon, and that's what I've been doing for a decade and a half now. is to get the benefits down to the people who create the carbon, rather than this being some abstract idea of where's the carbon coming from and who's buying the carbon credits and so on and so forth. So I think our whole endeavor has been, as a social enterprise, is to get grassroots organizations access to that funding, to that end buyer of that claim, who says that if you're buying something in New York which says, this has contributed to somebody else's climate goals, and where is the goal coming from and where's the actual product coming from, and that's where this picture is a demonstration of that, is that we hear a lot about greenwash and all of this, and this picture basically demonstrates on how it's for them to say, I am not a greenwash, and that's something that I think as a message we want to carry over the world. And the power of private sector finance to reach the people who really need it, and this is not a grant, and this is not a donation or a dole out. It is a payment for services, because they indeed are doing us all a favor. And that's what we're paying for, and that's how this should be looked at. For small island development, this is a mangrove project which is extremely relevant for small island countries as well.
Excellent. And Torsten, we selected your photograph.
Yes, thank you very much. Great to be here. And I thought, to balance it out in the context, this is about people and local systems, just as my two panelists have shown, but it's also about the ecosystems in which we live. Mm-hmm. And so I'm coming to this from really thinking about regenerative blue economy. How can we integrate protection, conservation, restoration of natural ecosystems into the way we develop our blue economy? And so this picture focuses not just on the mangroves, where we have very clear approaches now, but on the seagrass meadows, which are huge. And I've worked on, for instance, with the small island state of the Seychelles, on how to think about their seagrass beds, 100,000 square kilometers of really important ecosystem, really important carbon store. And at this COP, I was delighted to be on a panel about mudflats. I come from an area that looks like that, probably not as Caribbean as the picture, but we have tidal mudflats that are very important sediment stores, and the wrong kind of use destroys the carbon in those. So managing them, integrating them into the way we think about carbon assets, thinking about carbon as part of what I call blue natural capital assets, is really important, and it's the whole ecosystem. So this picture isn't just a brilliant beach that we can all enjoy, it's a massive source of value for a small island developing state and for everybody else who has carbon ecosystems.
Thank you very much. So let's get into the meat of the discussion at this point in time. And I want to pose my first question to all of the panelists, but I'll start with you, Sandeep. How can blue carbon projects effectively balance the goals of climate mitigation and adaptation?
The question should be how can it? I think it's an answer there that it should, in fact. I mean, I think a lot of the work that happens around blue economies and blue carbon, and Torsten's right, blue carbon is not just about the mangroves, it's about the whole ecosystem of it, and that includes the ecosystem in the sea, the coastline, and beyond the coastline. And when I say beyond the coastline, let me give an example. I mean, a lot of the blue carbon projects that we work with, we have to also work with the rice farming in Asia and in Africa, actually, because rice is quite the large staple food that is grown. And because of the salinity of the water, that is also a problem today. So a blue carbon project would actually have to work with the food security part for the coastal communities, the livelihood part, which is the fishery communities, and also the ecosystem, which is going beyond the coastline. Right. And this, what I describe, is the ecosystem that needs to keep adapting. And and when I say the ecosystem, is the nature and people, right? And this adaptation, unfortunately, right now, is the financing mechanism extremely bureaucratic right now. If we talk about public finance systems. And that's where I think blue carbon projects can play a big role in funding this adaptation. While carbon is the derivative, what you sell or transact in order to fund this adaptation, because this adaptation otherwise is not getting funded today. And this adaptation is something that we need in not just, you know, small island nations, any coastal community in the world needs this kind of adaptation. And I think that's what blue carbon projects can get for you. Yeah.
Yes. Your perspective, Torsten, how can we strike the balance between mitigation and adaptation?
What is so exciting is that these blue carbon ecosystems deliver on mitigation where we already know the numbers. And as of this week, the social cost of carbon was estimated at $190 per ton, so not the prices we are trading on, and that is just the mitigation benefit. Now, from an adaptation side, it is absolutely crucial that we keep these ecosystems because they protect the resilience of the coastal communities, of the real estate in the coast, of the physical infrastructure in the coast. So just from that resilience angle and how we, adaptation means resilience over time. And so by identifying their resilience benefits, so when the storm surge happens, what does the reef do to break the surge? What do the mangroves do? That in itself is a huge number. But I look at this also from a biodiversity angle, because biodiversity is such a key global need. It's a real important global goal. These blue carbon ecosystems have a massive contribution to biodiversity. And so if we do the restoration, the management, the conservation correctly, we're actually contributing to that opportunity. I was talking to one of the experts and she said, name me a single system where you can have elephants and tigers and mud crabs and blue carbon all in one place. It's only those ecosystems. So I can value them from biodiversity value and probably come up with a number which is at least similar to what we're talking about mitigation. None of these co-benefits are properly priced in the market today. And so the mitigation pricing is the entry point to help us deliver on the protection, to engage the communities, engage everybody in this journey. But where we're really heading towards is to think of them as blue natural capital, as integrated ecosystems of coast and sea space, of massive value, locally and globally. And that's really the journey. And so the adaptation part is an essential part of the narrative, but it's very local. Everywhere we have to look quite carefully, where does the system fit? And so I'm talking about insetting of these nature-based solutions as we develop big infrastructure, talking about the interaction between what is delivered at the local scale by the system and how can we actually develop blue economy investments that not only recognize this, but actually enhance those values.
Before I go to Svenja, can you, Torsten, give me any real-world examples of successful market-based approaches for blue carbon projects? Do you have any examples that you can offer us?
Yes, and I mean, as I say, we had an early part of the journey, but just think if I am building a local resort or thinking about putting up a fish farm or any other economic activity on the coast, if I treat that existing system as having zero value in my calculation, I entirely ignore all those benefits. So we speak with corporate investors, we speak with governments, we add this natural capital value into the equation. So if Belize, for instance, thinks about its NDC and the ability to deliver on the blue bond, all of those activities are about creating a value which then allows for the financing. And then on the market-based side, that very simple, if I can call it, first product, which is the carbon credit, is really the entry into that conversation. And so we have multiple places now where this entry happens. But what I'm trying to encourage people to understand is that the financing part of the project should come before the selling of the product. I use a very simple analogy. When you buy a croissant in the bakery, you don't expect the croissant price to pay for building the bakery. The bakery is to build first. And that is where we need to bring this narrative. So we just published the Blue Carbon Handbook with the Ocean Panel for a Sustainable Blue Economy, and focused on identifying these pathways, bringing more finance into the projects so that then the projects can deliver these various outcomes and get additional money to effectively maybe repay some of the finance and encourage more people to invest.
Certainly. So Svenja, how can these products effectively strike the balance? Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think if we think about what you said, Torsten, I totally agree. The market doesn't value the adaptation potential of these sort of projects. And if we think about it, we need to think about holistic planning of these projects. So from a project design standpoint, those things need to be addressed before. It's part of the bakery, not part of the croissant. And from an adaptation perspective, I think there's a huge potential for knowledge sharing and capacity building in these communities, because it's a two-sided approach. Project design comes in, but it's about the exchange of knowledge with market methodologies and pricing mechanisms, but also learning from the communities and perpetuating knowledge, local knowledge that's often being lost. Another thing that is really, really important is policy integration, because what we see often, and coming back to your point, the adaptation potential of these projects, it's not really valued by the market, and then it's pushed into climate adaptation, but it's one and the same thing. And to really strike a balance here and to make a point, the importance of monitoring of these projects, I think, is very, very important to highlight not just the climate mitigation potential, but also the adaptation, such as biodiversity. I mean, we have mechanisms in the market like CCB labels under Vera, not to be confused with CCP under ICVCM, but really highlighting the importance of community benefits, disaster risk resilience, shoreline resilience, and then further adaptation measures of these projects. I think it's very, very important to be able to quantify them, measure them, and make them visible in the market.
Now, Torsten mentioned finance in these projects. So, Svenja, I'm going to stay with you. What do you think are the key considerations for attracting private sector investment into what effectively the blue carbon initiatives? What are the key considerations?
From the space that we are in, voluntary carbon markets, it's important that we have consistent methodologies, that corporates are more aware that these sort of projects exist. I would say we all agree that over the last couple of years, blue carbon became a really big boom, and everyone wants to tap into the blue carbon bucket, but in my opinion, there's not enough corporate awareness that blue carbon consists of more than just mangroves. There are so many other methodologies that I think need to find a place in the market, and they need to find a price point. I know Sandeep works on a lot of mangrove projects, and I hope we can hear more about it, but the pricing question, they're more expensive. It's more expensive projects, and the willingness to pay for that additional adaptation value on coastlines, I think, needs to be translated into the market, and there needs to be more capacity building and knowledge creation in corporations that blue carbon is a thing, and you can actually, as a private corporation, invest into these projects.
Okay. So I want to switch the conversation then to the benefits of the projects to the small island developing states, in particular the Caribbean, and we have the Middle Eastern and North African region. Now, I am actually from Barbados, as we say in Barbados, born and bred there. Barbados is most easterly island state for the Caribbean area. 97 kilometers in perimeter, not a very large space. Most of Barbados is flat. 25% of the population live on the coastal areas. So you're talking about an excellent example of a nation that could be highly vulnerable both to changes in climate and natural disasters as those things ramp up over the years. So I'll start with you, Sandeep, and I want all three of you to address this question. What are some of the unique challenges you believe that are facing the small island developing states as we experience climate change? What are some of the key challenges? And how does Blue Carbon project specifically address those challenges?
One of the challenges is the degrading ecosystem, and degrading ecosystem is not just climate change is a reality we all agree, right? And that does, I mean, that does have an impact on coastal ecosystems. So it's challenging to keep up with the adaptation of it. And I'll jump onto the second part of your question quickly because I think there's an opportunity today and when Svenja mentions corporate awareness, I mean, it is, as of now, I think there's a fair degree of corporate awareness on blue carbon and biodiversity. Could it be better? Of course it could be. But I think there needs to be some capacity on the nations as well on how to access these kind of mechanisms. And I think that's where we see a little bit, I mean, we run, I mean, we have a revolving fund on blue carbon. We have about 3 funds on blue carbon right now. But we are always looking for opportunities to deploy. You know, the exact thing that Torsten mentioned and Svenja mentioned in terms of social capital and how you can, you know, work with communities on the ground. But I think there needs to be some capacity or awareness also at the island nation level on what this can do for you. Because today what we've seen in terms of financing for blue economies, so to speak, I mean, there are bonds and all of that, we think the entire coastline of the Caribbean can tap into market mechanisms to fund that adaptation. And it's not happening. And that's where I think the challenge is to continually adapt, but I do think there is enough funding out there from market mechanisms, and I'm not talking about the other mechanisms which have their own play, to really, really get money into communities to adapt, especially not just in Barbados. It's a small coastline, yes, but it's a massive ecosystem, you know, and so we keep. And that I'm hearing that in ocean circles sometimes, you know, like, yeah, but I'm a very small country, so what? You have a massive ocean there. So it is an ecosystem that needs protection because otherwise this country wouldn't exist in another 50 years or so. And that's the reality. I mean, and I'm not overstating this, you know, and that's a reality that with what we see as weather events and climatic events, these island nations are in massive danger right now. And I think it's time to deploy at scale with a view of the entire ecosystem and move away from just pilots and so on and so forth, which is why I'm a big proponent of, and which we're doing in the Middle East, and I hopefully would be able to do in the Caribbean, is to have different countries working together because it's a shared ocean space. You know, and that's where I think ecosystems are as well shared, especially for smaller countries. You know, and that's where I think blue carbon can play a big part in all of this.
But let me stay with you just for a few minutes. Do you think there is enough awareness within these small island nation states to want to move the needle forward, to want to get more involved in the Blue Carbon Initiative and to access the financing to do that?
I think the inclination to access finance is always there. It's about where and how, right? And I think we as different funders, and you know, we need to also start educating the governments about what this can bring to them. And I like to say, a lot of market mechanisms, and I speak about market mechanisms because I think it's a very effective form of finance. I know there's a lot of you know, talk here at the COP about loss and damage funds and, you know, GCF funding, but these take years to materialize. While you have an extremely agile form of finance which can deploy within the next 6 months. If I see a very nice blue carbon project in Barbados today, we would be happy to deploy right now, for example, right? So I think that awareness needs to be there. I think within the bureaucracy of the systems, and we work with a lot of governments, there is this thing that, you know, it needs to be climate finance the way they understand climate finance. But climate finance has lots of different buckets of finance, and I think that understanding It is not rocket science, right? I mean, everybody here is right now, we're negotiating something called Article 6. I don't necessarily think you need Article 6 for blue economies. I think the voluntary markets can take care of that, you know, to a large extent. And then you will have blue bonds, which will do something else for you, and then you have a global climate fund or an ocean fund, which can do something else for you. So I think all of them can interact with each other, and this awareness, it's not one or the other. It's all of it put together, and that's what I would think makes a very, very good financing mechanism, and countries need to understand that. And I think one takeaway from this panel could be the fact that how do we engage with countries and say this is not the worst thing for you. You have to explore these forms of finance.
Senya, over to you. What do you think, or what, from your perspective, are the major challenges facing the small island developing states?
Yeah, adding to what Sandeep said, I think it's a conceptual problem that ocean is often perceived as empty space, and it's something that divides us, but it's actually something that connects island nations. And it's a space and an ecosystem that requires collective governance and big thinking. And one of the things I want to highlight here is the opportunity for market-based mechanisms to really bring in local economic opportunities for communities, because these projects, they take a long time, and there are so many employment opportunities in setting up the bakery, setting up the project, especially in mangrove projects. I've heard wonderful examples, even from Sandeep, the employment of local fishermen for gathering the mangroves. And those are long-term employment opportunities. While in the market, it's often seen as if it's just a project and it's separated from the community. So thinking about holistic project design that provides benefits for these communities, and a shared vision across countries, managing these ocean spaces. And we think a lot about that, yeah, the VCM can only bring us to a certain point, and we need to hand it over to multilateral development funds and so on and so forth. And we are seeing a few project pilots under Article 6.2 now, where the idea is to establish public-private partnerships to bring projects into the market. And I think especially for blue carbon projects, it's a great opportunity to use private funding as a catalyst for some of these projects, and then connect them to public investors through regional development banks or multilateral development banks, or specifically targeted regional projects that are collaborations across nations that are targeting blue carbon.
Torsten, I know that you are the founder of Global Ocean Trust. So in answering the question, could you give us an idea specifically on the work that you do with respect to ocean work?
Absolutely. And I think Barbados is a wonderful example, because Barbados plays on the local scale. If I walked up that coast and saw the erosion going on and the competing uses, it's really important to get it right at the local scale. But also Barbados plays on the global scale an amazing role with the Bridgetown Initiative to really get the broader financial system and its architecture to rethink what it's focused on right now. And so I think integrating the nature component in that global overhaul is absolutely key. So I work on both of these things, so that's why it's an answer to your question.
Good.
So on the local scale, we worked, for instance, with IUCN, helped develop the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility. So that was grants for that early phase of projects. So very specific project, for instance, I visited a local community on a small island that was traditionally a fishing community. But the reef had been increasingly overfished, and the conservationists were telling us, look, you need more protection on the reef. So we worked with the local community. Local community identified seaweed farming as an alternative economic activity. It's turned that into a viable business, And at some point, we were able to get an impact investor to invest into that project. Now, the mangroves that sit all around that coast are all part of that local community, and they now see this as an additional source of income for them and for the project. So there's a whole journey over time, but the outcome is that there are revenues locally, there's less pressure on the reef, on the fisheries, there's more job opportunity, it's more gender balanced. So tons of positive benefits, and the component of blue carbon is just part of that story. But on the big picture side, we just had the meeting in Cartagena in Colombia of the development finance institutions. It's called Finance in Common. It's 500 plus institutions. And we were saying to that world, look, you've already started that journey towards sustainable blue economy, but at the moment, often, you look at individual projects. Here's a port project, here's a shipping project, here's a wastewater sanitation project. These ecosystem values of integration, this insetting of nature-based solutions, this understanding how the ocean actually works, is at the moment probably present somewhere in your biodiversity assessment part. So it's a way of saying, if we do something that's really bad for biodiversity, we won't do it. But what we want is that positive engagement. We want more funding into this space, more creativity, more engagement of local entrepreneurs, of partners, to actually bring all this together. So out of that, we now have a group of development finance institutions that signed up to positive action for ocean as a goal. And so this is a whole new process. We have a whole range of very large institutions who are taking this space seriously. And I am very confident that that has massive implications then, because it means that for a country like Barbados, talking about the debt type situation, you add your natural capital assets to the equation. It changes the risk profile of your country for international funders. It's just a completely different way of thinking about the world, but it's what is necessary to achieve the just transition.
Excellent. I want to circle back to Sandeep's previous comment with respect to accessing private funding into these projects and the scale of these projects. Is it fair for me, if I were to play devil's advocate, to say that it is more difficult for private funders to go to a project like a small island project simply because the return on the capital is not going to be as attractive? Is that a fair assessment, or am I mistaken in looking at it from that perspective?
No, you're not mistaken at all. I think, but we have to change. Okay, let me just take that a step back. I think all the financial instruments that Torsten speaks about, right? And then they have the public finance instruments as well. And then if you're blended with a lot of the work that we do, maybe, for example, and then you'll have a very, very good return system. Because not everybody is looking for the financial IRR. For example, an impact investor is probably looking at a social IRR, and you are looking at a financial IRR. And I think larger collectives, and I'm a big fan of collectives. I do not like one program in piece by piece meal. I mean, I don't think that's the answer to ecosystem restoration or anything for that matter. And I think private sector finance can play a very, very good role in the agility of it. And I keep mentioning, and quick deployment, because you need that money quickly. I mean, we keep seeing banners of climate action now, and then we keep writing lots of, guidelines and guidelines and guidelines on how that finance should move and who should it go to. And you have application processes which last almost 3 years. And I'm like, guys, what are we doing here? And the more we wait, the worse the problem gets, and the more the cost of that restoration. So this is an opportunity cost lost as well, the more time we lose. So in my opinion, to answer your question, yes, as of today, and Torsten says that the social cost on carbon is 190, you said? $190. If the market recognizes that social return, all of the IRRs are off the charts. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So now the thing is, how do we get to a position where we can make corporates aware or the entire financial community aware the actual cost of carbon and make them pay for it? Because today I think we live in a world where we're talking about market mechanisms. Again, I get it, market mechanisms, but we have market mechanisms for climate. It's very different from market mechanisms for metals. And I don't think we should equate the two. And a lot of this world is trying to equate the two and calling this a commodity, which I do not like one bit. Because this is an urgent problem that we are trying to solve. And market mechanisms is one way to solve it. If we are going to equate this, with a Goldman Sachs kind of an investment, it says, no, I want the same return that I get from here, here, here. Well, you're not really future-proofing your business by doing that. And that's, I think, in a way, a very short-sighted way of looking at things. So I would assume two things, if I had to answer you. One is blended with other forms of finance, you will increase returns. And number two is, I think the way we look at returns will change over a period of time, because it's a question of existence, it's not a question of unbridled capitalism is what I call it, and I think that is quite counterproductive to what we are trying to do over here.
Fair. Okay, so I just want to switch the discussion now to the contribution to the NDCs. Senya, I will start with you. In what ways do blue carbon projects align with the NDCs and contribute to achieving the SDGs?
Yeah, I think, playing devil's advocate, I think there's a lot of people think about NDCs and SDGs as two separate things. And that brings us back to the umbrella of the discussion, a dual approach of climate mitigation and adaptation. Of course, blue carbon projects from an NDC perspective can contribute to a country's NDCs if they've been included in the NDCs in the first place. But simultaneously, a lot of these projects tackle SDGs. So it's not one or the other, it's both together. And coming back to monitoring and data and awareness, I think that should be the message. I wish there was, maybe there's so many frameworks by now, but I really wish there was more transparency into what NDC actions actually are connected to which SDGs. We see it in the carbon markets on project basis. We can look up PDDs, we can look up projects on the registries and see which SDGs are tackled through these project interventions, but we don't really have insights on that on the NDC level. And it would be interesting to see, in a country, and I mean, the publication of the NDCs has been a complete nightmare for the last 7 years and ongoing, and we are waiting for the new submission next year. Next submission, NDC submission is going to be next year, and I think bridging the concepts, because if we think about it, NDCs come out of the Paris Agreement, SDGs come out of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. And bridging those two concepts a little bit more, understanding what are the benefits of NDC, reaching NDCs into SDGs, it's really representative of exactly the discussion we are having today, thinking about these two things as two different concepts, but it's actually the same thing.
Okay. Torsten, a question for you now. How can countries, you believe, effectively integrate the blue carbon initiatives into their national policies? This will all happen at the governmental level. And there needs to be, a buy-in at the governmental level such that you enact policies both at the legislative level and also basically at the social educational level. So how do you think that governments can effectively integrate those strategies into their policies?
I think we've made amazing progress with the Ocean Panel, for instance. So I was an expert for the Sustainable Ocean Panel. It's work around 100% sustainable ocean plans. So the 18 countries, heads of states who already signed up to it, and all these additional countries joining, will look at the entire ocean estate and think about ocean and coasts as part of sustainable development. So integrating these ecosystems is absolutely crucial to do that. So we now have a methodology and approach to do that. And maybe two quick answers just on these two previous statements to make on the purchaser point. Apple is buying, Salesforce is buying, Microsoft is saying we need to get all our old carbon emissions dealt with from the past. The amount of demand, provided we can deliver this in formats that is understandable, that has no reputation risk for these large corporates, is massive. So huge demand from the private sector for the right kind of blue carbon, blue natural capital asset. On the NDC part, when we started this, we managed to get 2 or 3 countries to write something into their NDCs. In the latest summary, I think we're close to 100. Now, the challenge is that each of these countries writes something different in. One says, I'm doing X hectares. The other one says, I'm going to invest. So that can't be added up in a clear, simple way. That's why we need to move it to that next phase. But the movement, the excitement is there. And so if I pick one SIDS that is doing this, I think, really impressively, is the Seychelles, where the seagrasses are in the NDC. The Seychelles are saying, we will protect all of our seagrass, 100%. But we will need to find some mechanism to at least pay for some of the extra work and costs that come with doing that. And so we're saying, look, the narrative around all this amazing effort that you do as a country needs to be somewhere reflected in the climate finance part of the discussion. And so there is a really clear role, this is exactly your point, for a national strategy. There are tools to do a national strategy, but there's also a clear benefit, both in terms of integrated policy, local action, but also the linkage with the Paris Agreement. So it all comes together. So I'm very optimistic about this, but it does take work from all these experts, and it's an important task.
No, Sandeep, your work takes you into the sphere of advising NGOs, quasi-governmental organizations. How receptive do you see in your work that governments and quasi-governmental organizations are interested in going beyond just a conversation and into actually enacting policies that will move the needle forward?
Well, I mean, regrettably, I think it's a bit slow, to be honest with you, especially on the government side. I think the governments are used to a form of finance. I mean, I'm talking about the form of finance that we can provide, right? For example, we have this revolving fund with L'Oreal that we operate, and we've been trying to get it into small-scale projects. You mentioned quasi-governments and NGOs and on the works. But a lot of governments are used to public finance systems. I think the moment, and a lot of ecosystems, ocean ecosystems, might not be privately owned, and that's where the problem comes. Because there are different line ministries who are responsible for different things within that ecosystem. So you have the Ministry of Coastal Conservation, then you have the Environment Ministry, and then you have the Revenue Ministry who actually has the land notifications. So I think there needs to be an understanding of how private sector funding can go to these communities, but the land specifically does not belong to those communities. And that's where the problem is. And that's where, when we talk about private sector finance accessing, going into the ground, we first need to figure out jurisdictions. It's community. The government is the custodian of the land and not necessarily owner of the land. And that is somewhere lost in translation on all the discussions that you have. So a multilateral has a very good conversation with the government, but when we go there, they're like, yeah, but this is all mine, kind of a thing, which is a wrong way to think about it. I think we have to look at different ways of engaging with governments, and regrettably, when you ask the question, I think that understanding is lacking. When we say, yeah, we have some carbon credits, of course, go for carbon credits, but yes, we need a carbon waiver. Where is it going to come from? That is the bigger question, and that's where I think a lot of funding. And going back to Torsten's point about corporate demand, yes, there is demand, but I still would want to see prices for the actual product. We have funding from Silicon Valley companies as well for a lot of our mangrove projects. And one of our mangrove projects, for example, we have a self-help group that collects honey and is trying to sell it on a digital marketplace. There will be healthcare centers across different islands. There will be a hospital boat of sorts, because this is in an area which is an archipelago of almost 300 islands. There's schools that are being built, there's off-grid electricity, water filtration, all of it. And when I talk about all of that cost, somebody says that I would pay you $20 a ton. And this is from a Silicon Valley company. So I think we need to up the needle on both the supply side, which is the government side, and understanding the idea of land rights and how which community can access what. Because otherwise we'll be left with extremely large NGOs, international NGOs giving out aid. And I don't like that at all. This is not how blue carbon should work. And on the other hand, we need a bit more understanding of the actual cost of that blue economy and willingness to pay for it. I see CDR, I mean, removal credits, some of them are, somebody said that $15,000 a ton or something. And I'm like, that same company is asking me to sell my carbon at $20. So why is that carbon more precious than this? I just don't get it. So I'm not saying that carbon should not this thing, but I think the real cost of carbon is missing from the corporate side of things, which will solve your IRR problem to an extent. You know what I mean?
Yes, understood. So we're almost out of time, so I just want to give each of you just 3 minutes each. Where do you want to see the blue economy, the blue carbon space between COP28 and COP29? What do you want to see happen in that space? What advances do you expect within the ecosphere of what we're dealing with? I'll start with you, Torsten.
Today is a really exciting day for our space. Over in the other room at, I don't know, in a few hours, we will be launching the Mangrove Breakthrough Financial Roadmap. Now that is a pathway for an investment of $4 billion US. That's the framing we're talking about between now and 2030 to actually deliver all of these really important values on the ground. So I think what we are doing at this COP is lay out this roadmap. The next COP, we have to see how is this scaling, how is it working, are all the actors involved, is it done at a project level in the format that is necessary. But everybody is now around the table, and I would like at the next COP to it be not just mangroves, but integrated coastal blue natural capital. That's the roadmap. We have lots of very good examples of specific projects that are happening already. Now we need to get that broader process, but this COP is about it being happening. So this is the action COP for blue natural capital.
Svenja?
What I want to see next year. Well, first of all, I live on an island. I've been living in Hawaii for 5 years. And living in an island nation, or in an island state in this case, it changes you. Because access to resources is limited. And people talk about island economies. So I really hope two things: that island nations are being taken serious. Small islands, but the most vulnerable ecosystems and nations to climate change. And when the Paris Agreement was signed, I was working at the UN in the Small Island Development State Unit of UNDESA. And I spent time in the Security Council at the UN headquarters, and I saw the president of the Maldives crying in front of the Security Council because the country is sinking, and resettlement agreements have already been signed with Australia to resettle the population. We need to move quickly, and I want to see more agility. There are so many initiatives and so many pathways and frameworks are being signed and released, but we need agility and we need to act fast. So I hope over the next year we see more movement in the private sector through private finance, because what Sandeep mentioned earlier, we have the ability to act fast. Within 6 months, a year, we can make a change. And it's time. That's what I want to see over the next year, because I don't want to see another COP where we sign more things. I want to see results. And I hope you're right, Torsten, that this is an action COP, that we are moving forward and really listen to small island states.
And Sandeep, the final word over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, I mean, in our terminology in VNV, we don't call them vulnerable; we call them first responders. I think that's a very, very important concept out there because we need to stop looking at them as like, yeah, yeah, I'm here to save your life. No, you created this problem for them. It's time to pay up, and it's time to make them adapt and help them adapt. It's very, very important that that is the narrative that we follow. As I think the world over, we are talking about a very top-down approach, saying, okay, I think this is what is best for you. I will get you the funding. I'll get you the finance, and let me sort this out for you. No. This will not get sorted out like that. We may speak in very high-level panels at the COP, but at the end of the day, these are people who will have to be given resources to deal with that problem that you have created. And that's why we should change the narrative completely. And I do hope, and you know, the incident that Svenja mentions at the security, of the UNGA, I think it was over, but UNGA, I think it was, but that was years back. And we still have the same guys here talking about how small island nations are sinking. So I'm like, what is going on? We keep coming to COPs and saying, this is a problem, this is a problem. When are we going to go to COPs saying, this is what we did and this is what we're going to do tomorrow? I think it's a shame that we're still in that world where we have to have small island nations saying, we are sinking, we're sinking. By now, we should have said, yes, you're sinking, but here, this is what is being done, and this is what's going to be done tomorrow. And that's what I really want to see. I know it's not going to happen because I've been attending COPs for years now. Every year we announce things and we keep doing things and we put things into text and then celebrate that something came into the text and then some 4 years later there's some money being doled out. It's just not the way this is going to work, you know. So I really, sorry, but I really hope it's more like, okay, we take stock take for what we did last year. And that's what we should be talking about. Not that this is a problem.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank each and every one of our panelists. As a native from a small island developing nation, this discussion is critical, but more than just a discussion, we need to make sure that there's action and that there are resources that are deployed to solve these issues. So thank you all very much for the time, and we hope that next year we will be celebrating the advances from this year.
Maybe also a Secretary General from your country.
Yeah, that's sure.